See, again, I feel like, 25 or 30 years ago, I could have answered this question with a yes. And the problem is, I feel like I have given all of those possibilities a chance, and they've all failed to do so. And so at this stage, I can't fathom what that would be. I cannot fathom.
Can I give a quick example that might help?
Yeah.
So, I think we both agree that gravity is happening. That's
Yes.
pretty consistent.
Yeah.
There's certain conditions where it varies, outside, the planet and stuff like that. But we have a pretty reliable evidence that it happens.
Relatively.
Yeah.
Technically,
right.
I'm using the word relatively.
So, like, I have a belief that if I let go of this pen, it's going to drop. And
Right,
it does.
right.
But even though there's a repeated feedback that it is happening,
Right.
I'm still able to identify something that if it did happen,
Right.
that would cause me to rethink my understanding of how gravity works. So, like, let's say if I let it go,
And it just hovered there?
it went up, it went left, it went right. It did anything other than what I understand. I understand how it should behave.
Right.
I can identify that's what would cause me to doubt or be less confident of my understanding of gravity. So, in the same sense, we're talking about all these things that you've kind of gone through and checked, marked off.
Mm-hmm.
What could change? What could you learn? And is there a way for you to know if you are wrong?
Gosh, this side of death, I don't know that there would be. I'm really trying to think of something that would allow me, because the problem is we're dealing with a personality, and so a decision maker, and so it's not like a pen or the law of gravity. It would be more like how confident I am that your name is Eddie. So, like, what would prove to me that your name wasn't Eddie? A lot of that would depend on how much I trusted you. So if somebody presented me birth certificates showing me that your name was Larry, and I'm like, listen, I've known Eddie a long time, and he says his name is Eddie. I think you forged the documents. So like there's a different level of investment at a personality level. So for me, God is not just a concept like the law of gravity for me to question. God is a person who I'm engaging with, and so I would have to. The problem is, not only would my intuition, my personal experiences, and all that kind of stuff have to be not shown that they could be flawed. I know they could be flawed, but shown that they are flawed, and that my reason is somehow, pretty deeply flawed, and that my testing of, for example, the parts of Scripture that are necessary needs to be flawed. There's revelation. That the way I have seen it and experienced it lived out in others' authority would need to be flawed, like at every level. And then, even the in what in my opinion is the radical evidence of empirical evidence that argues for a intelligent creator. For me, I'm not a believer. No, I'm not a fan of blind faith. I believe only in reasonable faith. Faith just means trust. So many people abuse that term. They Mark Twain's faith is believing what you know ain't so. That's just ridiculous. That's an abuse of the term.
Okay.
Faith is trust. If I put faith in something, it means I'm trusting it.
Okay.
So if I take a path to safety, I am putting my faith in that path to save me.
Okay.
I can know a lot about that path, or I can know nothing about that path. Regardless, I'm putting my faith in it to save me. So if I've walked the path a million times and I know it's going to take me to safety, I'm still trusting it to save me.
Okay.
If I've never been on that path and it's blind, and I'm walking that path to save me, it's the exact same faith. One is reasonable, one is blind. And I'm not a big fan of blind.
Okay. I want to get back to the way you could find out. And I think I might have not followed you. Are you saying that right now that you can't think of anything that would validate that there was no one? There's not necessarily something you could find out? Or are you saying that these reasons that you have right here, if those were shown to be false, generally?
If those were shown to be false, if it was what I just listed, if each of those pegs were taken out and were shown to not be, that what I had experienced was delusion or error or whatever.
So what experiment could you run?
I have no so experiment is only empirical evidence, and so I don't know beyond, how do you test for an eternal spiritual being with an experiment? And I don't know that you can. I mean, that's always the skeptic's problem, is trying to figure out how to test for it.
Okay.
You can't build a unicorn tester to test for unicorns, which doesn't prove that unicorns exist or don't exist. The spaghetti monster between Mars and Jupiter or whatever. You can't. You can't prove that it's not there, and it might be possible to prove that it's there at some point if I make the claim that it's there, but at this stage, there doesn't. Okay. If I'm claiming something that does not have an empirical footprint, then the empirical evidence is not going to prove its existence.
Okay.
But I believe empirical evidence is only one of the sources of knowledge, and I think that who's the Japanese physicist with the long white hair? It's like KB or Kobe or whatever.
Yeah.
But he recently came forward. Now again, I'm not making any claims that he is saying he didn't ask Jesus into his heart or something. He just said the evidence is that there is an intelligence behind this. Now, he may be talking more of the Spinoza type of intelligence, that he believes there's an intelligent universe or something, but they're clearly, in his mind, there has to be a God behind this. Now, if he was sitting here, I'm not saying he would go like, yeah, Chris is right. I'm not making claims on him. But the evidence of the evidence of the physical universe is that there's the big secret behind it all, is that there is a secret behind it all.
Okay. So I heard you say that there's an investment, because this is a being, there's a certain level of investment you have.
Sure, yeah.
If the reasons that you have to be as confident as you are in anything else, if those reasons aren't testable, and you are unable to identify a way for you to figure out if you are wrong, do you think having such a high degree of investment in that belief is reasonable?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think that there's any question. So the idea of, if I've got the big circle, how much do I color in of what I know? The fact that I can't color in all of it doesn't mean what I do color in I don't know. So the difference is I've done these. Like, I did test this empirical evidence is always ongoing. I did test this rationally.
Okay.
And he passed.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, if the empirical evidence, if the reasonable evidence had not backed it, if the laws of statistics made it more plausible that there was no God than that there was, that would be an evidence.
Okay, so,
but there's no one.
If there's a test, kind of walk me through what is the test and what is a failed result. So if you tested it and it turned out to validate that there is God, what can you identify what it would be to invalidate that? So what is the test, and what determined that you went, there's God, and what could it be that would invalidate that?
So if there was a more reasonable explanation for existence, for why there is something rather than nothing, than a self-existent creature, a self-existent being, then that would be a failed experiment. That would mean that, therefore, that would be an evidence against. So the problem with the pen example is, so if you let go of the pen and you let go of it and it floats, is that going to cause you to now not believe in the law of gravity?
It would definitely cause me to doubt, and if it
But if you dropped other things and they all fell, you would start going, oh, must be some kind of, maybe there's a weird draft here, or maybe there's a, I mean, you would look for a different explanation.
Right. So I can still think of what would happen. Let's say that certain things were heavier or lighter than I anticipated at all, and it was like a worldwide phenomenon, and other people could validate that it happened. That would be something that I'd be like, okay, maybe I just don't have it all figured out, and maybe gravity as I know it doesn't work.
Good. So I would say if at the same level, systemically, it was shown that reason did not support the existence of a God, then I would begin to doubt the existence of a God at that level. In the same way that your test about gravity is a systemic test, you would say, I would need to see in multiple settings, under multiple conditions, that empirical evidence no longer supported the concept of the law of gravity. There's no such thing as a test. It's a systemic thing. You have a lifetime of experience seeing it working a certain way. You would begin to question at least your understanding of the laws of gravity. In the same way, if systemically it was shown that the way we had reasoned through the multiple arguments for the existence of God was unsound, then I would go, okay, we have a problem. Sure. I mean, there's something going on here.
So specifically, what reason would you accept?
What do you mean?
If there was a reason,
again, there's not a single rationality. I'm not talking about reason as in explanation. I mean reason as in the philosophical term reason. So it would be the rationality for God's existence was shown to be flawed systemically. Then, in the same way, I would begin to question, okay, so apparently reason is not, or rationality is not proving that there is a God, in the same way that the way we're measuring and weighing things is not proving that there is gravity.
So maybe that's not necessarily a test that you could run. It's reasoning would have.
When you're talking about rationality, yes. So if each of the main arguments, like we said earlier, if each of the main arguments failed, then yeah, that would be a test, that would be a fail, that would cause me to reduce confidence in the existence of that there is a God. So is there any one thing? No, it'd have to be at least 5 tests. There'd have to be one for each area of knowledge, because each area of epistemology, in my opinion, I believe, I'm convinced, supports the existence of a created God.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, like, when I talk about the gravity thing, I'm giving you very specific real-world examples.
Right.
Like, if this happened in 10 minutes, and it happened all over the world, that if that happened, that would cause me to doubt. And so when you're describing the test you could run, I'm not quite understanding what would actually have to happen, or what evidence would you have to see specifically that would say there is no God.
So we could pick them case by case in the same way. So when you say the law of gravity, let's say what you're actually asking is, do I still trust physics? Is there such a thing as physics, is what you're actually asking. And if the law of gravity would be a piece of that, you could prove the failure of the law of gravity. Would that prove that there's not such a thing as physical law? Well, no, we're going to need to test a whole bunch more of them. So what you're asking for is I have a systemic belief. I have a belief that is based on many different fundamentals that I've worked hard to find. I have pulled hard in an effort to tear them down and have failed to do so, and so has everybody else that I've engaged with on it. And so to say that there would be a single test, no. So for example, if you prove to me that there is a more rational answer for the design nature, the refinement of the universe, so you show me that there is a better explanation for the refinement of the universe, that would be one of my arguments in regards to rationality. Gone. That would fail.
What explanation would you accept?
Oh, I don't know yet. No one's. If I knew that, a better one. That's the problem, is that I don't know enough. I can't tell you what the answer would be. If I knew that answer, then I might not be deist if I knew better answers to these things.
Okay, so
It would have to be a better, more rational, more sound answer than there's intelligence behind this.
So if there's no maybe test that you could run, and there's no explanation, you're not able to identify the explanation that would validate that there is no God. Is it possible that there isn't, but you simply don't have a way to identify it?
Of course it's possible.
Okay.
Of course it's possible that there isn't a God and I have no way to identify it. That's, again, what I said earlier. It is possible that that naturalism is true, and that naturalism is the full explanation for that secular naturalism is the full explanation, in which this conversation is bordering on delusional. This is no different than monkeys barking at each other in the trees. It has no more significance than that. There are consequences for that my intuition would say is not plausible. So, for example, what that means is my connection to my children is nothing more than a genetic connection, which doesn't explain my adopted children, but is nothing more than a genetic connection. I don't love them. I just happen to be related to them. I have no different feelings for them than an alligator does for her offspring. It's just more sophisticated chemicals than an alligator has. There's no meaning to it. That me being kind to a mentally handicapped person does not make any sense at all, because they are no different from a dingo, or I'm no different from a dingo. I'm a more sophisticated version of a dingo, and I've tricked myself into believing in such a thing as right and wrong. I don't know if you know, so I don't remember if I talked about this with David, but bighorn sheep, a few years ago, Stephen Jay Gould did a fascinating, he's an atheist, or was an atheist, I think humanist, but he, in The Measure of Man, he wrote about the fact that they were starting to suffer a crisis among bighorn sheep because they were selecting for bigger and bigger horns, which is not always a good idea when you live on top of a mountain, because they were having more and more of the male sheep fall to their deaths because they were so badly imbalanced. Because evolution is about the superiority of the individual to be able to pass on their genetics, which may or may not help the species. In this case, it's hurting the species. So, but they're still the ones being able to reproduce. It may be that we over-evolved these brains, and that these brains are so out of control now that we've created the illusion of culture, civilization, morality, and God. And that we're really just overly evolved amoebas.
So I want to get back to...
That is possible.
I want to get back to that testability question. So do you think that we should be as confident in beliefs that we can test, or that it's falsifiable, as beliefs which can't be tested?
So test or not test, again, you're talking empirical evidence. Typically, when you're talking about testing and not testing, that's only one of the 5 sources. In regards to empirical evidence, no. If you cannot test something, it is not as valid as something that you can test. Valid being the technical term. It is not as applicable across a larger sphere if you cannot run tests on it. If you can't run any tests on it, if you can't do anything in regards to evidence, then you have no empirical knowledge about it whatsoever. Empirical knowledge requires repeated testability.
Okay.
So in regards to God, that's the complaint about the God of the gaps is a legitimate one, that people say, well, that must be God, and they jump to that conclusion. But at some point, the evidence points to an intentionality. That's where you make the step over to the philosophical argument, or the reasonable argument of teleology, that when something is extremely complex, that indicates a designer. That's the experience we all have. The fact that I know how an engine works doesn't indicate there isn't a Henry Ford. It's a good indicator that there is a Henry Ford.
So I'm going to repeat back what I thought you said, and just correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying that if we have a belief that cannot be tested or cannot be falsifiable, we or if we can, I'm sorry, if we have a belief that is tested or testable and we can falsify it,
Huh?
we are more justified in being more confident in, or
Sure.
okay.
So here's why I would say. Here's what I mean. What I mean is because that adds strength to it. It's to empirical evidence as a source of knowledge. Empirical evidence being a source of knowledge is important. It is a source of truth and knowledge. If you can run tests on it and you can come up with repeatable results, it is more. You have a higher level of confidence. It's actually the correct statistical terminology. A higher level of confidence than something you can't. That being said, you still can never know something with certainty. Even empirical evidence isn't incapable of knowing something with certainty. So, because there's nothing wrong with empirical evidence, it's flawless. We are flawed.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot perfectly study anything. We infect it. We whatever. So, is it better? Sure. If we could find. So every time we find something. Here's a great example of this. So every time we find archaeological evidence of the soundness of Scripture. So when we go, there's no such thing as Hittites. This is some biblical mythical race. There's no such thing. And then archaeologists uncover the culture of the Hittites. You better believe I take that as evidence in the trustworthiness of Scripture, because that is something that can be, we've now tested, is it trustworthy? And the empirical evidence is, yes. We found evidence of it. So when I say, of course I would say, and I wish, absolutely. So this will maybe answer your question. I would love if I could take a clip off of God's shoulder and test it in a test tube with a strip, and it turns blue rather than pink because it's God. It's got God material on it. Yeah. Because I love science, and I am a big, huge fan. I love science, and I wish there was a more empirical way to test the existence of God.
Okay.
There isn't, and I wouldn't expect there to be. There isn't, which is a bummer. I mean, I really do wish there was, because I love that. I consider science empirical evidence of there being a God, but I can't just go, here's the toenail clippings I can test. I wish there was.
So the last question, we can move on to the good and bad God thing. If you recognize that there's you're not able to identify something that could falsify the God belief or the God being existing.
No, I think there are plenty of them. That's what I'm saying. But there's not one. It's a systemic belief. So it would have to be systemic change in order for me to disbelieve.
Okay.
Since I have a systemic belief, I don't have a belief founded on one thing.
Okay.
I believe it just because my grandmother believes it. So if she stops, or I believe it just because I have a good life, and therefore if I start suffering.
Okay.
Makes sense? So
could you, if it is testable? So wait, I'm trying to realize. Is it testable?
It is disprovable. Okay. So testable, what you've got with testable is you're only in empirical evidence. I don't know how empirical evidence could ever prove there is not a God. Empirical evidence is typically unable to prove there's not something anyway. It doesn't disprove things well. It can prove that something is there, but it doesn't. It's not a good job. It doesn't do a good job proving something isn't there. Okay, that makes sense.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mishear you. So,
but there are proofs that sufficiently could prove to me that it is not rational to believe there is a God. It is not right to believe there is a God.
But I remember you saying that there wasn't a empirical testable.
I don't know an empirical one.
Okay. And you recognize that certain belief that should give you more confidence. So I guess my question is, if there are things that we believe that is testable and we can falsify them, like gravity, and there are also beliefs that are that don't have a falsifiability to it. Mm-hmm. Why are you equally confident in both of those?
Okay,
how could you be as confident in the God belief if it's not falsifiable?
So you're saying, like, how could I not be? I'm only 75%. I assume I could be.
Right, but
if there was empirical evidence,
you said it was
would I be more confident?
I feel as confident as anything else.
Because I don't believe there is such a thing as empirical evidence. No, I don't think there is anything as empirical proof that God exists. So as confident as I can be in anything, I am confident in God's existence. So that doesn't mean that there are other things that, like, I am not. So here's the problem with empirical. One of the issues with empirical evidence is you're talking. Predictability is a big part of what empirical evidence is. So, am I convinced that my wife is not having an affair right now? Yes. How convinced? 75%. As convinced as I can be. Right?
Is there any belief that you have more than 75% confidence in?
I don't know. That would be interesting. I don't know that I'm capable of more than 75%. When I ran that study on myself, kind of try to figure out how sure do I get of things, it's got to be in that range. It's in that 70 to 80% range that and as a psychologist, I mean, I don't know, 98%. I mean, the bell curve would dictate, I guess.
Yeah. I've
got to leave a standard deviation at the end, the 2%.
Yeah.
I could never be above 98% because I could be having a schizophrenic break right now. And
okay. Yeah. And I swear this is the last question. We'll move on. But if 75% is the max on any belief that you could have,
right?
And you recognize.
And I'm saying there could be more evidence.
No. And you recognize that there are beliefs that you have that are falsifiable, which means, and you're saying that if it is falsifiable, you can be more confident in a belief if it has that.
Okay.
So why?
Now I'm understanding. Okay.
Yeah.
If you pulled out of your pocket and you said, you won't believe this, Chris, I can test the existence of God in a test tube. Like I can. So, and I can show it falsifiably. And what you showed me was that there was a God. Like you had a scanner, Dr. Venkman with it, whatever. And you did the scanner, you go, look, God particles. God is here. I would not go above 75%. I am already there. I have sufficient reason to reach me to as confident as I get. So more empirical evidence if there was a way to empirically test the existence of God, that would not bolster. I don't think that would bolster me because I've reached that 75% already. More evidence is at this point unnecessary.
I'll try to ask it in a better way.
Okay.
So if there are beliefs that we have that are falsifiable,
right,
and some beliefs that we don't,
that are not falsifiable,
right, and we recognize that falsifiability should give us more confidence because we're able to tell if it's not true, and the God belief is not one of those.
Yeah.
Why is it as confident as the other ones that are falsifiable?
Okay, so sufficiency of evidence is the concept I would give you. If I was convinced, if we were back in that court case you talked about, except it's you, and there had been absolutely sufficient evidence, like they had now shown with 4 different times that you had murdered people. And the question is Eddie a murderer? And I would say, yes, I have sufficient evidence to believe he's a murderer. And they're going, no, wait. We have another body. Look, and that's testable. We can prove he murdered this one. I would go, yep. I'm not now more confident you're a murderer. The first one they proved to me that you killed somebody in cold blood convinced me you're a murderer. More added on does not make me more sure if I'm already sure that you're a murderer. So where I am in my relationship with understanding God and knowing God and researching God and going through the muck of getting right to just 75% for me, like what I'm saying is so even if there was a way to test the existence of God empirically, that there was a way to show falsifiable or provable that there was a God, and you showed me, that's why I said a minute ago, and you showed me that there was. So if that existed, and you were able to show me that there was proof empirically in a lab that there is a God, I don't think that would push me above 75%.
I'm not wondering why you can't go above 75. I'm wondering why you're there when it's not falsifiable.
Because I have sufficient evidence. So I guess what I would tell you is maybe what would help you is that I would say that's what I mean when I say once you've reached the level of confidence that you're capable of, there's no reason to continue sitting around and waiting. I have reached the level of confidence that I'm capable of. And so that is all the confidence I need to be at 75%. That's all I can get. Is there further evidence? All the time. So if I pray for somebody and what I'm praying for happens, I don't say, well look, okay, there's not more proof there's a God. Yeah, I consider that there's more proof that there's a God, but I don't like if I consider it miraculous, that is, which is rare. But that would be like I don't suddenly go, okay, now I'm 76%. I have sufficient evidence to make this claim. It's all these different levels.
Okay. So what you're
I
saying
agree
is,
that it would be nice, and if that was true, if there was that empirical evidence was possible with the existence of God, I might have reached my 75% much sooner, or more quickly, or at a younger age.
okay.
So
what I hear you're saying,
I consider that as bonus now.
what I hear you're saying is you can get to the 75% confidence without it being falsifiable.
Empirically, yes.
Okay.
Empirically falsifiable. It is rationally falsifiable. It would be historically falsifiable. It could be revelation falsifiable. I
Gotcha.
don't know how that would work, but yes.
Okay.
And intuitively falsifiable. But intuition is such a weird one that it's such a personal one that it's hard to
Right.
engage with.
Okay. Let's move on.
Good.
So
That's a fun conversation. You give me some cool things to think about. I'll have to wrestle through some of those. That's good. I appreciate that.
no problem, man.